So I wanted to get like a Ukraine update and a well, actually a Russia update. Since you were in the Donbass and somewhat recently, I can get we can get a real firsthand report. There was also an article that I clipped from Margaret Kimberly about how the U.S. continues escalating in Ukraine, and I think that this is going to kind of support some of the things that you're talking about. Indie Media Award honoree, Black Agenda Report, as well as the person sitting right now underneath me, next to me, and on the other side of the screen. But that the U.S. government got more than it bargained for after instigating the Ukrainian conflict. Biden foreign policy team grows more desperate as their plans become more dangerous. They reckon with the unintended consequences of their actions. Right? Victoria Nuland, our favorite Victoria Nuland. Oh, just so much problems caused by that one woman alone. Between in the last 8-10 years, she's pretty influential, unfortunately, in a negative way. Yeah, one of those persons in the revolving door foreign policy, Maidan Square. Now she's in South America, right? I believe. Is that where she's based now? I think she's in Venezuela or in Brazil, setting up, and pretty sure that's what
She was, yeah, she was supposed to take a trip there, as far as
Mhm.
I knew. Brazil, I think.
Right. She gabbed on an unsecure phone, discussed who the next president of Ukraine ought to be, right? Declaring Ukraine's new reality as a de facto U.S. colony, she famously, or rather infamously, said, fuck the EU, right? So,
Hmm.
of course, she's back with Biden administration. She's the leader of the proxy war against Russia and Ukraine, right? And then just recently, we know she said she referred to uh, Nord Stream 2 as a hunk of metal at the bottom of the sea. Um, we've been saying from the beginning that the accusations are ridiculous about what happened with Nord Stream. It's pretty obvious what happened, that it was some kind of a NATO operation. It likely was planted in June when they were doing joint operations with Sweden and Finland and Poland. And then the charges were likely set off by British intel in September. That's the best guess of what actually happened, so that the U.S. has plausible deniability, and everybody else in the area is implicated. There was no detection of any Russian ships, any Russian anything activity anywhere in the area beforehand. There's no way that it could have been what they said it was. So that was yet another psyop, talking about, you know, talking about what psyops are doing. So that's my take. Okay, we will work with Germany to ensure it doesn't move forward. Of course, that was Nuland in January, and and then you've got Biden saying, "Well, we're gonna make sure it's not gonna happen. Turn the ruble to rubble." She's just been a Russophobe and a Russia gator and someone who has been directly profiting for her benefactors off of this conflict. I mean, I don't know if she's being paid by the weapons manufacturers. I would guess that she's not directly, but she's certainly taken care of by them, I'm sure, in some way, shape, or form. And recommended for jobs and recommended to certain things, and they take care of their own. Um, Thoughts on all of this, on Nord Stream, on Ukraine, on the PSYOP, on all of it.
Right. So we know that Victoria Nuland was extremely well involved in the ousting of Yanukovych, a democratically elected leader of Ukraine in 2014. And people like to forget that that happened. They like to pretend that, the US just went in there benevolently. We know it was a CIA operation. We know that she and Jeffrey Pyatt manipulated that election as they manipulate elections all over the world. And they that of course was used as the excuse to lead the Maidan coup and liberate certain sectors from the Russians. But in reality, these people, after the fall of the Soviet Union, so many parts of these areas were ethnically and are ethnically Russian. They have culturally the Russian language, the Russian heritage, and they never felt not Russian. And this is what people don't understand. It is Russia. It's always been Russia. That part of what we call Ukraine has always been Russia, and they get really offended when you don't say that it's the Donbass is Russia, that it has been a part of Russia for a long
Huh.
time. These people chose it even before the uh, the the voting to become part of the Russian Federation that took place this last year. The people there felt that they were Russian, which is why they were fighting for it. You'll see a lot of Soviet flags in the Donbass. You'll see lots of talk about what the Soviet Union was. Lots of nostalgic memories that are there because Ukraine during the whole time in the Donbass didn't do anything for the people of the Donbass. Everything that was built, the buildings, if you go look at them, they were Soviet era buildings, Soviet era apartments. The only thing Ukraine did was facilitate the delivery of some water to the region, which is why now they afterwards they blew it up and
They cut that off,
Donbass
right?
lacks water.
Mhm.
So they really haven't done anything. So that's why there's so much loyalty to Russia, and these people are not fighting just for themselves. Even though, of course, for 9 years we know that they were subjugated to torture, to shelling, continuous bombing, being stuck in basements. I got to talk to some people from Solidar who is now going to be part of the Russian Federation, that area, and they were very, very shaken, but they also understand that many of their relatives are in Ukraine. What people need to understand is Russians don't hate Ukrainians. Russians see them as family, as brothers and sisters, as people that they know. And a lot of their family members are on the other side. So many didn't want to speak to us because they felt that it could endanger them
Get them
and
in
their
trouble, sure.
families in Ukraine.
Mhm.
Um, and then the revelation of the soldiers, the liberation of the soldiers that were, of course, POWs kept in captivity, and how they were tortured. Well, some of them, both the people that were stuck in these basements and the soldiers, have mentioned hearing English speaking voices, which tells us that there are mercenaries, that there are NATO troops there that are fighting with Ukraine's army. And there is no denial, as the German MP, German politician, recently said, that they are at war with Russia. They're not denying it anymore. They know that this is happening. They know that they can't hide it anymore, that it's not about Ukraine's sovereignty, that Ukraine's sovereignty has been gone since 2014 or perhaps before that, technically. And it's not about protecting Ukraine, because Ukraine's economy will never be the same. Ukraine will never be the same as ever now, because it's about destroying Russia. And they said this in the 2019 RAND document, where they talked about breaking Russia up and
Yep.
using the Balkans to do it. And that was mentioned. But also the fact that the Minsk Accords were admittedly only to buy us more time and to continue training Ukraine and preparing Ukraine for war with Russia. And so we know that it's not about that. And recently, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov admitted that if the United States and NATO continue supplying more weapons and more aid and involving themselves in Ukraine, Russia's going to have no choice but to continue pushing back further, because they cannot risk this happening again. They can't risk NATO being at their border, because this is why Finland and Sweden are such an important part of this, because if they became a part of NATO, they would completely entirely surround Russia, and Russia knows that that's not good. They can't have that, because again, they know that the goal is to break Russia up into ethnic groups, ethnic minorities, different states that they can control, that they can say we're giving them sovereignty. And this is where I fight with a lot of anarchists, because they, and some libertarians, because they tend to be like, well, everybody has the right to sovereignty. That's the excuse that the West is using. The West has never, ever given a damn about anybody's sovereignty. We see every time they leave a place, they leave it worse off than what it was. We've seen that in Syria in their support of the White Helmets. We've seen that in Afghanistan in their support of Al Qaeda and the radical, actual radical extremist. And we've seen that happen throughout the Middle East, and what happened, of course, in Iraq. And this is nothing new. It's the same exact playbook, which is why you should by now at least recognize it, if you're at least 30 years old and older, you should know what it looks like
We already did it
because it's the
once.
same exact playbook.
Yeah, we
They've done
literally
it so
already
many
did it
times.
once. We did it to the Soviet Union, literally. Help. We didn't do it. Over time, it broke itself up into literally republics like you're talking about. Right now, they just want to take Russia and do the same thing to them. But Ukraine and all these countries, what we want to do is tear them down, Americanize them, and then steal their natural resources. It's been the playbook for 30 plus years, 100%. Um, and again, with natural gas, look what's happening here. Nord Stream, now they have to buy American, US LNG, right? And that was the long-term plan. It's also about resources. We wanted to make sure, and somebody I heard talking about yesterday, we wanted to make sure that Germany and Russia did not form a strong alliance based upon
Right.
a lot of different things, because a strong Russia and Germany doesn't really. Now, my other question for you was BRICS. With everybody, with
Mhm.
U.S. bases surrounding Russia, with them making deals with China, with us saber rattling against Taiwan, with what's happening down in South America with the currency and the de-dollarization, the fact that Saudi Arabia is now going to buy is now going to allow China to pay for oil in yuan versus U.S. dollars. All the things that are happening there. How does this? How do we undo this to the point where this does not escalate to the point where we're all running under the tables every hour or whatever? Like, I, I don't want to see that happen. This is why we're going to talk about that in the next article, which is about the anti-war protests and the anti-war rally that's going to be happening. How do we stop this now? I
Well,
mean,
this isn't going to be stopped. It's going to go one way or the other. That's the thing. Like there's no people need to understand Russia is fighting an existential war. Like they're not just fighting for Russia. They're fighting for essentially the world, essentially. This is how a lot of people are seeing it now. A lot of people outside of Russia are seeing it. I don't necessarily think Russians themselves are seeing it as much as they should, but I think people outside of Russia are seeing it. You mentioned BRICS. Well, BRICS is growing. And it's
yeah,
growing exponentially because these countries that have all been the victims of US hegemony are realizing that it's actually beneficial to have multiple economic relationships with people who are going to treat you as equals rather than tell you what you can or cannot do, who you can or cannot talk to, and have a very unilateral hold on the relationship versus a relationship with mutual benefits that are happening. That's why, again, you're seeing Africa, where Sergei Lavrov just finished his leg of a multi country trip there, where he was widely well received because, again, Russia has a history with Africa helping to decolonize Africa under, of course, the Soviet Union, and helping, especially in South Africa, as we know, during these times. And whereas Europe and the United States, especially Europe, France, England, the Dutch, have a history of colonization. And what they've been trying to do, and what the United States has done, and what Lavrov accused the United States of still trying to do, is neocolonialism, where they want to maintain this neocolonial hold on Africa. And Africa's like, no, we're going to have a relationship with China. We're going to have a relationship with Russia. It's not about ideology as much as it is about economic need and about banding together against what they see as this unilateral attempt to maintain power, while this multilateral attempt is growing and it's becoming strong. And you talk about, Latin America. Latin America has elected more anti-establishment, more anti-West, not even anti-West, but just politicians that are going to hold the West more accountable, that are going to try to seek independence from the West and reliance from the West. Obviously, I mentioned the de-dollarization, but beyond that, it's just economic ties to the countries, powerful countries like China. They no longer need the United States. This is what the United States needs to realize. They're no longer needed. The Russian sanctions aren't working. I put up a video not long ago about a Russian market. I've never seen more juice in my life as I've seen here. Somehow I can order to my door fresh orange juice, and I can't even get that in the United States. Fresh squeezed orange juice. I can't even get that in Florida, and there's supposed to be like oranges in Florida. and it's insane. And it's not working. The sanctions aren't working. Why? Because Russia has India, and India isn't really talked about enough, but India is growing. It's growing economically, and they're
I
trading
bet they are.
with India, rubles to rupees, and they're trading with China, and they're trading with Pakistan, and they have all these relationships building up. So Russia doesn't need the EU. The EU needs Russia. And Germany, as you mentioned, was the number one most affected country because they always got this cheap gas and
Hmm.
energy from Russia. And the United States did not give a damn about sinking Germany because they don't care about sinking their allies. They've done this time and time again, and they say as much. And they did it because, of course, it makes them money. The amount of money being made by Lockheed Martin, Boeing, and all of these companies is insane. And so the United States is basically using the EU for the economics of supporting this war, using NATO's collective for arms and for actual bodies, and using Ukraine for the majority of the bodies and the majority of just the political aspect of it. How much is the United States really losing? They're not really losing much, and the defense industry is making a lot of money. The American people are losing. The American people are being left and pushed aside, as they usually are, because before, if you had a world war, if you fought war, you were supposed to see some benefit at home from it. You're not seeing any benefit in the United States from it. Not for the people. You're seeing only the benefit go to the defense industry. So
That's it.
eventually something's got to turn with the American people. It's the American people are, I think, the ones that mainly have to come and show an anti, not just an anti-war movement, but an anti-US military State Department movement, because it's not just about being against war. It's understanding that there's going to be opposition to your hegemony, that people are going to fight against what the United States is doing, and they have every right to do so. That we have more in common with people of Russia than we do with our leaders. That your enemy is not Russia or China or Iran or any of these people that they tell you are your enemy. That your enemy is the State Department. It's Victoria Nuland. It's Jeffrey Pyatt. It's Joe Biden. It's the Democratic and Republican factions. Those are your enemies. And that's really where it has to come from. It has to come from the United States.
Yeah, they are trying to destabilize the world at the behest of their benefactors. You know, where what's the defense fund or the hedge fund or whatever, the consulting company that Blinken used to work for, that Michelle Flournoy still works for. They're one of the most influential companies in the world because they're like one of these behind the scenes organizations. They
Mhm.
are lobbying. They're a lobbying organization. They're lobbying Washington to allow for the fascism, for the technology companies to be even more enmeshed in what's going on. And now you've got, back and forth. Alan McLeod reported on this last summer, from Facebook to Google to not just the Twitter files. We know that all the FBI, ex-FBI, CIA,
Yeah.
former people that work there, but they're threaded throughout all these social media companies, and we know that they're reporting back. I mean, they're there for a reason. But as Margaret Kimberly saying, tanks this week were on, or last week were on everyone's list, from Leopards in Germany to Abrams in the U.S., and they require manpower, highly trained, who need months to learn how to use it. Ukraine has neither enough men nor time necessary to make tanks useful for them in battle.
Yeah.
So, of course, Russia's got tanks and soldiers who know how to use them, and the latest alleged game changer won't amount to much in the way of assistance for the beatified Ukrainians. And she's 100% right? But Nuland and her boss, Blinken, and his boss, Joe Biden, are caught in a bind of their own making, right? But the fantasy foreign policy is just that. The only thing that makes sense is to talk to the target nation directly. Yet, if the past's any indication, they probably will do something reckless instead, because they don't want to come to the table. We know they've been scuttling negotiations for close to a year. Nord Stream explosion points to the danger that the U.S. poses to the whole world. Hopefully, like you said, people are going to start waking up to that. I think they have, but they've been afraid of our military. But what they see is that Russia, by proxy, has been holding off the U.S. military pretty damn well for close to a year, and
Yeah.
they shouldn't have to. It's a terrible thing to see as an American. First of all, we're depleting all of the resources and all of the stocks that we had been building up over time. Why? So that the defense contractors can reload. Okay, got to get out those 22 models. We need to move, we need to make space for the 23s. Like literally, that's what they're doing now. It's making me crazy. 70 Abrams tanks, and now they want Leopards. Why? Because
1488, by the way,
yeah, yeah.
from Germany. Yeah.
Oh yeah, exactly. Rearming Germany to the tune of $100 billion. That's a good idea. Who thought that? Whoever thought that was a fucking good idea? Just look. They have been. They are a sovereign power economically. They did not need to be another military power. The last time that happened, when they were the military and economic power in Europe, something good didn't happen for a while, and it took the Russians to actually go in there and fix it. And us too, of course. I'm not saying that we didn't. In the process, they create more dangers to Europe and the whole world as they play a game of chicken amateurishly with another nuclear power. All right, Ukraine is losing, dependent on an unending supply of money from DC, suffering after many casualties, of course, we know, and we don't want to see that suffering. We want to see peace. We want to see this end. We've been wanting to see this end since before it happened, but shelling the Donbass repeatedly, starting on the 16th of February. This is something that actually somebody who I met, I think, in Convo Chat and Convo Discord way back when, for Mitch to Twit on Twitter. He goes on these crazy long rants. But one of his things, and I absolutely agree with him, was that this operation, this conflict had not started on the 24th of February, but it actually had started on the 16th of February when there was shelling happening in Donbass. And nobody was acknowledging it. Nobody wanted to pay attention to it. And on the 24th, that's when Putin declared the republics independent and said that he would protect them, after they had begged him for ages to do so. And he had set deadline after deadline. And there was, how many times did they say that he was going to invade? He was going to invade, and he was going to go all the way to Kiev. And he didn't do that until way, way afterwards, because that was never the plan, but they kept poking the bear. You poke the bear, that's what's going to happen. Zelensky.
He hasn't gone to Kiev either.
He still hasn't, right?
Yeah. And they could. That's the thing. They don't want to. Russia does not want to take over Ukraine. Or definitely does not want to take over Europe. They don't the Russian way of being is different than the European way of being. Yes, there are young people here who see through social media the coolness of the West, but overall, Russia is not just Moscow. It's everything outside of Moscow. And this is something that happens in every country I visited. The capital is one thing, but the rest of the country tends to be more loyal to the national aspects of the country. They tend to be more aware of what's happened and the history. And Russia understands that they're different. They're not Europe. They will never be Europe. They'll never be accepted by Europe. This is not about expanding like they've been trying to tell you that Putin is Hitler and wants to expand and take over the entirety of Europe and all this and that. And it's actually the EU through the World Economic Forum and the United States that want to expand and take over the entirety of the world and just subjugate us to this whole ideology and this totalitarian government. And more people here talk about that than I've seen people in the States. Remember, it only started with a few of us, where some called it a conspiracy smoothie, where it was supposed to be this crazy thing. And now, because it's popular, everybody's talking about it. And a lot of people talk about it in a very superficial way, where they just say certain keywords and say the globalist here, the globalist there, but they don't really know what that means. Or what they're really talking about here. And what we're talking about is that there is like a war going on between those that really want to subjugate the world into this totalitarian order. And it's not communism. It's certainly not socialism. It's a fascistic Orwellian existence where you don't get to decide what you want in your life. You have no independent thought to decide. It's where the government decides for you, where you have to adhere to these beliefs or you are cast aside. And so with Russia's more of a traditional society. Yes, they have their faults, and yes, there are things I disagree with Putin on, but the reality is Russia has a right to choose what they want. So does every other country in the world. What China does, what Russia does, is up to the people of China and Russia. You don't have to like it. You don't even have to agree with it, but that's up to them. It's not up to us to defend. When's the last time US intervention actually helped anybody out? If somebody can answer that question for me, that'd be great. And by the way, during World War II, it wasn't until later that the United States government finally agreed that Hitler wasn't going to be the winner and that he needed to be destroyed. But it really took forever for the U.S. to get involved,
Yeah, I
and
remember
and
that.
that led to a loss of lives. And now Russia isn't even invited to the commemoration of Auschwitz, I think it was, that were of the release of these concentration camps. Why? Because now Russians are the one we hate. The same way we refer to Russians, where the athletes can't compete, artists can't show their work, where books are being burned and their culture is being looked down upon. Their religion of Orthodox is completely just being destroyed by Zelensky and all these churches and stuff. All of that, they can't travel to certain countries. If we switch Russia was Jewish, we would have a huge problem in the West. But because it's Russia and we've been programmed to hate Russians, it's not allowed. We shouldn't treat anybody like that, no matter who they are.
Yeah.
But the reality is it's being allowed. And that's something people don't talk about, is like the way this is happening is just so it's Russophobic, yeah, but it could be applied to any other culture that you decide is the enemy. The West needs an enemy right now, and that enemy has to be Russia at this moment, and it is also China, because
Well,
China, of course, is behind Russia.
and that's where I was going. Was Margaret Kimberly said, having had Ukraine blow up in their faces, they've turned their attention to China. An Air Force general, of course, wrote that famous memo last week predicting war by 2025 and exhorted his subordinates to fire a clip into a 7-meter target with the full understanding that unrepentant lethality matters most. Aim for the head. Guys, they can throw the entire population of the U.S. at us and still have 1.5 billion people. We're not winning a war with China. We're just not. We are just not. Members of Congress are still provoking China with visits to Taiwan. Yeah, thanks, Nancy, for that. And of course, Blinken canceled his trip last week. The balloon's ridiculous. Yeah. Was it even a Chinese balloon? I don't even know if it was. I think it launched from North Carolina. They don't land in North Carolina. They're perfectly allowed to. Hell, when I was in camp, we used to do this balloon launch every year and see. We used to tie a postcard to it, right? Let it go, and then they were supposed to. Whoever found it was supposed to mail it back, and you could see how far could my balloon go. Like that literally was what I was thinking when I saw this whole thing. I'm like, oh, it was a balloon launch. Okay, so yeah. Same goal as fair policy in Ukraine, provoke some sort of incident, then sanction China or come up with a rationale to sanction them without an incident. Right? This is what they want to do. Biden administration turns the old saying on its head. First, you don't succeed, fail again. Right? And the people lose. They lost 113 billion while our needs go unmet. But a state devoted to creating a proxy war with a nuclear power has no interest in helping its people anyway, as you said. Humanity is a hindrance to their grand schemes. They see the welfare state as something to be subverted. NATO Secretary General said without irony, weapons are in fact the way to peace. Of course, peace is the only way to peace. All right. Wars can end with negotiation, but peace is antithetical to their grand plans. Ukraine is not working out the way they had hoped. Remember, who has been offering to come to the table to negotiate this entire time? It has not been the United States. They haven't tried to scuttle negotiations for a peace at all. So whoever's in chat saying that Russia is warmongering and that there's anything about Putin and Hitler or whatever, it's just not the case. It ain't so. You just keep swallowing the Intercept and Bellingcat whole and go have fun with them. But that's just not what's going on here. All right? They see forever wars as a success. This is our military doing this. This is not Russia's military doing this. Russia does not want to spend their resources fighting NATO. They just don't. They want to support their people. They want to house to clothe and house and feed their people. All right. But our people see forever wars as a success. Baiting Russia, China as a success, regardless of the outcome. They don't see the world the same way that we do. They have made the Ukraine conflict an existential crisis. It has to be one, right? World is a zero-sum game to them. And if China and Russia are independent actors, they believe they lose. The problem is they're going to band together. They already are. And that combined power, you don't want to see that. You just don't. Right? Blowing up pipelines are seen as proof of victory to people who thought they could make dangerous and irrational obsessions come true. Just more merch. Hey, you want to get a hoodie? I got that there too. Purple, dark, good stuff.